this is Tony Henley, and I want to welcome you to Elevate, living life at a new level, a higher level, inspiring leaderships. That's why we call it Elevate, is because we know that we can go to new levels. And this is our first podcast, and what we want to do, I want to take a few moments and explain to you the heart of Elevate and how we are praying and hoping that we can be a blessing to others. And Elevate, it started as we put together a workshop that dealt with self-leadership, and it's my belief that as a leader that we have to work on ourselves beginning, to work on ourselves to become better leaders, but then once we become leaders, it's really about empowering others and equipping them to go do what they're called to do. So in our inaugural podcast of Elevate, our hope is to inspire you. I want to give you a little overview of what to expect from our podcast. We're going to be giving you tools. We're going to be giving you we'll do book reviews. We'll talk about our journey a lot, because here's what I've learned is that to inspire others is a lot of times it's hearing how others have navigated the path. And so our goal is to help you or take you on a journey of how we've navigated that path, giving you, and some things you'll look at and you'll say, okay, I can apply that, some things I can't. But our hope is that something will inspire you. Because see, one word can change you, one story can change you. You might be in the same experience and you say, hey, I remember that story and I can apply that to my life. So Elevate, and our ultimate goal is through this podcast is also to make you aware of events that are going to be coming up. We're working on a conference for 2015, and an Elevate conference where we bring people together, and we have some great speakers, we have some workshops, some tools that are going to help you to work on your leadership. Because here's the deal, we all know that we're faced with challenges daily, but what we can do is as life learners, we're always learning how to tackle those challenges. And that's the whole purpose of Elevate is to help you to tackle those challenges, whether it's in leadership in your home, leadership on a business, a ministry, wherever it is. Our goal is to be able to help you navigate that. Now, my heart in ministry and in life is twofold. One is to inspire leaders, but it's also to build relationships and families. And I believe that the marriage family, the family in general, is of great importance, and what a great place to start leadership. So that's kind of in a nutshell of what Elevate's going to be about. I'm joined with my great friend Paul Chicato. He will be co-hosting with me, and he and I, what you're going to see is we're going to be just discussing different aspects of leadership. And in this particular podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about our journeys as far as leadership and how we have developed over the years, and people that have influenced us, and circumstances that have put us in those leadership positions at different times. So I want to welcome Paul. He's the pastor of Powerhouse Church, and he has another organization he's going to share a little bit about as well. And I want him to go ahead and greet everybody and give us an introduction of what he does.
It's a true blessing to be here with you, Tony. I've known Tony now almost 18 years. We met when I was a full-time youth minister, and we had a wonderful revival that took place within our youth groups at the time. Since then, it's created a lasting relationship, because we both have the same passion, and that's this, is that leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. I heard a great leader tell us this one time, and his name is John Maxwell, so we've been blessed to glean from a lot of his leadership understanding. But over the years, we've learned much. As a result, now I'm full-time pastoring, and my passion is to see lives restored. And in the process of seeing lives restored, from the time of restoration, you also teach them how to acclimate and become productive in their community and within your churches and your ministries, and even in your own jobs and businesses. And of course, that takes leadership. So I've been blessed to be a part of this. When Tony approached me on this, I was like, most definitely, this is what I live on. In fact, one third of my mission statement is dedicated to raising leaders. And so this is what I believe in. I believe that it's necessary in every aspect and every component of every person's life, even in your own home. If you understand how to lead, you can lead anywhere, and that means even in your own home. So this is a great opportunity for us to come together and be able to share these things with people such as yourself, such as other people that are other individuals that are in leadership positions, to be able to take the things that we're going to speak about for the duration of this podcast and be able to teach those so you can apply them into your lives. And so I've been blessed. I've been pastoring now for right at 10 years full time. I was a youth minister prior to that for almost 10 years. And we've been in Bakersfield, California for just about as long, for a little over 10 years. And anyway, it's been a huge blessing to be able to take these leadership applications and see how productive they can be when you minister into lives.
That's good, yeah. You know, let's talk a little bit about our journey in leadership. You talked about being a youth pastor. I know Pastor Paul and I, we started working together. He was a youth pastor. I was a lay minister in a church. And for me, my journey, even though I'd been in the military and had some leadership training as far as in the military, in the church world, I was still, and even in the business world, I was still developing and growing. And as a lay minister, I found that I was lacking. That there was a lot of, because here's what happens a lot of times, we get positional leadership. And for me, it was a positional leadership, but I wasn't in a place of ready to lead. And I was still maturing and still growing. I remember my pastor went and bought a book. It was Developing the Leader Within You, and you made mention to John Maxwell. And by the way, every leader out there needs to read John Maxwell's book, Developing the Leader Within You, because here's the deal, you can have leadership skills and abilities, you can be charismatic and still not be a leader.
That's right.
We have to develop our leadership. Right. And for me, that was the beginning of my real journey. Was we began to read that book as a staff and going through the book and implementing different tools. But it went beyond that. I took it to the next notch. Is, hey, I want to be more, I want to continually grow, because one thing John Maxwell talks a lot about is life learning.
Yes, he does.
And so for me, I started the Enjoy Life Club. I listened to that, and if you listen to this, you'll probably think this is a sales pitch for John Maxwell, but it's not. But but you can obviously see that he's influenced our leadership. Definitely. Which is a good thing, and he's influenced so many others. So I started with the Enjoy Life Club. And that was a quarterly CD with a transcript that would come to your house and you could listen to. And I did that monthly, and then I went out and began to buy books and began to just read and devour leadership. Yes. And start to grow in that areas, and then start to implement those things. Went to college, and then went to did my master's, the 2 masters, one in management and leadership, and the other one in marriage and family, which are both my passions. But so leadership it's an ongoing process. Now, tell us about your journey, Pastor Paul. How, as a young man, starting to work in the church as a youth pastor, how did you begin to develop, and how did you grow your leadership?
Well, mine was slightly more climactic, because when I first began a full-time ministry, especially as a youth minister, I didn't understand the importance of leadership. And so as a result, I tended to run the ministry as a result of what I felt, what was beneficial to me in many ways, and not realizing how unbeneficial it was for everybody else around me. And so what had happened was, I just started youth ministry, and at the time I was trying to get to know other youth ministers in the area. Well, I did. I found out that there was a youth minister gathering every week within the city at the time that I'd lived in, and so I thought, well, I'm going to go be a part of that. Now, you got to understand, I've grown up around youth, not just youth ministry, but full-time ministry since the time I was born. My grandfather was a minister. So I think there was a part of me at that moment that I really thought I knew something, because I was around full-time ministry, realizing real quick here at this meeting that I went to that I knew nothing. And so I entered into this meeting one day, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got something to bring to the table. And I'll never forget, there were about eight young men, very smart, very well educated, and we began to meet about what we wanted to do in our city. And I was very excited. And so they brought up a proposal. Well, from that point on, after that proposal was brought up, and I'm still thinking that I knew something. One of the gentlemen said something that just totally blew me away. He was speaking a language that I didn't even understand.
Yeah.
I mean, literally about leadership. And then all of a sudden another gentleman spoke up, and he started saying things that I'd never even heard of.
Yeah.
I'm like... So I ended up sitting there about 99.9% of that meeting, acting as if I knew what I was doing.
Sure.
Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. And in reality, I had no clue.
Yeah.
But here's the ultimate point, is that I walked out of that meeting, and I said, I am never going to go to a meeting like that ever again and be the only guy in the room that doesn't know what he's doing. And I'll never forget that day. It ministered to me,
Yeah.
but it so hit me. It was such a climactic point to realize I didn't know anything.
Right.
And from that moment on, I took it upon myself to say, okay, knowing just a few good scriptures is not enough
Yeah.
to help me carry this thing through. I need to know something that's much deeper than this. And I begin to devour books. I begin to devour tapes, CDs, articles. I've read hundreds of articles.
Yeah.
I've read multiple dozens of books just on the subject of leadership, period. As a result, that day changed my life,
Yeah.
and that's been part of my journey ever since, and I've continued to grow in this area.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, and this was in my case, of course, and you brought it up, is, you know, we both started in ministry. With me, it was, I didn't start as an administrator in ministry, I started as a speaker in ministry.
Yeah.
And there's a perception, because you get in front of people and you begin to share the gospel, that you know it all, or
Yes.
that you're
Yes.
already a qualified leader. Now we know that in the book of Timothy, you know, the Apostle Paul, when writing to Timothy, talks about qualifications. He talks about your home being in order. He talks about all these things, but we realized, or at least I realized, that I was developing.
Yeah.
And when I would get out of the pulpit after sharing the gospel, I found that people were coming to me with leadership questions that I wasn't qualified to answer.
Yes.
So yeah, again, it was that preparation, that just because we know Scripture doesn't mean that we're qualified as far as leaders.
That's right.
And that's why I think something that we see so many, you know, in the fivefold ministry, and you can talk a little bit about this, but because when you think about the fivefold ministry, there's teachers, there's pastors, there's evangelists, there's apostles, there's prophets. Now, not all of those, you know, we know apostles will set up ministries, they'll move on, they set up leadership, and they maybe oversee a variety of ministries. Prophets, a lot of times, they have a word.
That's right.
And then we know that the pastors and teachers often are more located in a local church. Even evangelists, you know, they're all for the equipping of the saints.
That's right.
But out of those fivefold ministries, I've found that some, even pastors, and I do want to clarify something in our podcast as well. You're going to hear a lot about Scripture. You're going to hear a lot about us sharing, you know, our journey. Our leadership journey has not only been in business life, but it's also mainly been in the church life. I know it has been for me, as well as Pastor Paul, as he shared. It's about 20 years in ministry.
20 years now.
Yeah. So kind of, can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit, about the perception of people when they look at fivefold as far as leadership, and how, as fivefold ministers, we can, you know, how to address that when people come to you?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that we do that I've learned over the 20 years of ministry, because I understand that a lot of times as ministers, we're just in need of help.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we tend to qualify everybody based on, hey, they're good people, or they do have they seem to be people that are spiritual or whatever. So what we do is we instantly qualify them based on that. And don't get me wrong, they're qualified to do anything.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they understand the necessary components to being a good leader still, like you said. Just because they have charisma doesn't make them a leader.
Right.
And so one thing that we've learned is that rather than just putting people in a position, because the moment, even in our worship team, the moment somebody is up on the platform, it's instant in the minds of people, oh, they're a leader.
Right.
Well, in reality, they're not. They just know how to play their instrument. So what we do is, knowing that they are in that position based on the eyes of the people that are watching them, we say, look, you're going to have to go through training just to be up on there to play. Because everything that you do in front of people translates to the people that are watching as leadership. So the perception is that the moment you get up in front of people, look, we could sit in front of this podcast podcast right now, and people would assume, if they didn't know our background,
Right.
wow, these guys know a lot. And
Right,
the truth
right.
is we could just be here talking.
Right,
but
right,
we're
right.
not. We're coming together based on experience.
Right, right.
So here's the perception, is that people tend to watch us based on the fact that you would assume that anybody that would be willing to voice what they voice their experiences and voice what little knowledge they may have, that qualifies them as a leader to lead others.
Right.
No. What we're saying is that perception can be wrong, and so what happens is people don't know what a leader truly looks like.
Yeah, that's good.
And so our job is to make sure that I know that as a pastor, that even if all you're doing is playing an instrument, that individual can answer any necessary component, at least with a foundational question on leadership, that they would say, this is why I am where I'm at.
Right.
And so that way people don't have this misperception that you're just up there to play, so that way you can you're not playing just for yourself now.
Right.
You're playing and you're saying, I care about the people that I'm playing for, no matter what position you're in.
That's good.
And so leadership is very important, and that perception can be totally misunderstood because we already know that standing up in front of your people, talking and waving your hands, looking really polished and good means absolutely nothing if you can't take a group of people with you.
Yeah, it's very good. Very good. Yeah, that's one thing I've learned about leadership is that when you're aspiring to be a leader or you're working towards that leadership,
Yes.
It's all about us in the developing.
That's right.
But when you become in that leadership position, then all of a sudden it becomes, empowering, educating, inspiring others to lead, giving them the tools that can lead. And one thing I found in the church world when I was working in a church as director of ministries, we deal a lot with volunteers, which is, I think one writer listed one of the most difficult leadership positions is the church, and it's because of that fact of the volunteers. People are there voluntarily, and because they volunteer, a lot of times, as you stated, we put people in positions because maybe they're charismatic, maybe they have a gift or a calling for a certain position. And we both learned, we both kind of shared a little bit about our backgrounds of developing, gifts developed as well as leadership. It develops in our lives, but it has to be intentional.
It's exactly right.
And that's the important thing, and that's one thing I appreciate about Powerhouse Church is the fact that you're taking people and you're teaching, giving them leadership skills that they can succeed in ministry. And that's what's important. We all have a mission. Every organization has a mission. I remember working as director of ministries, and one of my tasks was educating, bringing in volunteers, identifying leaders, and then working with them to develop. And also giving them opportunities. And that's one of the things that I think helped me more develop in leadership was that there was men and women in ministry that were willing to take a risk on me as a leader. And that's important. Now think about that. Because I know for me as a young man, being called to minister behind a pulpit to teach or preach, even with that, I think the first sermon I ever had, I was hiding behind a bush pretty much. I wrote it out 3 pages and was done in 15 minutes. Looked at the pastor and said, "It's yours now." So that's developing as well. We developed our gift. But I so appreciate, the Apostle Paul when he was Saul. He thought he was trained in as a Pharisee. He was traveling down the road. He thought he was doing God a favor, and when he had his conversion, that was a Barnabas that stood up. And the apostles didn't accept him. Because they thought, man, this guy kills Christians. But now Barnabas is the son of encouragement. He was somebody that came along and encouraged him. But also, if you look in the scripture, he went off for a period of time and he was trained in the ministry, and then his ministry came about. So talk a little bit about risk taking. As a leader in a church, surely your pastor, my pastor, took a risk on us by putting us into ministry that maybe we were gifted for, but we weren't qualified in the sense that we were still developing. And they were there to help nurture that and help us through that. But talk a little bit about risk taking and leadership.
There's one of the things that I learned over the years is that there's no such thing as ministry without sacrifice. And in order to sacrifice something, it becomes a risk. And the reason it's a risk is because there's something that I'm going to, as we've learned, is that you've got to leave something behind in order to go forward. And I remember when we moved from one city to the next to be where we currently are right now in ministry, it meant leaving something behind. But the greatest risk of that was that, is that we're moving to a place that we're not even sure wants us. We're moving to a place that we're not even sure that the people are going to accept us, that we're going to be able to connect, and yet we knew God was telling us.
Right.
So what we do is, because like all things, is that you prepare for the risk. And this is where I think a lot of times it's that dichotomy where a lot of young ministers and business people, doesn't matter what level you're at, we see this even in the new being married for the first time in that new marriage, is that what you have to do is you have to prepare for that wedding, for that day. You have to get the cake ready, you have to get the people ready, you have the bride and groom. There's the church, you got to get the minister. There's so many things, a plethora of things that have to come together in order to just make that one moment of saying I do happen. And the risk is, what if they say I don't? I mean, most likely it's an I do, because if you've made it that far. But there's always that risk. It's the same way with ministry and business. You move into an area, and you come in, you've done all your homework, you've done everything possible, but there's still the one element that supersedes all of it. The one element we cannot control. It's called the human element.
Sure.
I can't control those people and say, I can't do that mind melding and say, you're going to like me no matter what. I can't force them. I can't put a gun to their head. In fact, most likely they would dislike me even more if I did. What I do is I come in with the attitude that God's called me, because that's the only hope that I've got to let's put it this way. There's how can I say it? There are things that you can do to minimize the risk, but it's still a risk. So what I do is I come in, I do everything that I believe that God has showed me to do. I take all the natural abilities that I have and work them together for that good. I also take and learn as much as I can possibly learn to bring that together. And all that does is that minimizes the risk. But risk is still there, because I still can't change the human element. So that's why you've got to completely trust God. So everything is like jumping off a cliff. You've just got to hope that there's a nice soft point to land on when you get there.
Even with young leaders, when you took a risk, you started a church in a community that you were new to, then raising up leaders within that organization as people started coming in. Talk a little bit about the risk of saying, of putting a young leader behind the pulpit, or putting a young leader in a ministry, that releasing them to do the ministry, and allowing them to applaud their attaboys, but also help them with their failures. That again, you can. So many people are too extreme. The moment if somebody messes up, they're no good, and I'll just have to do the job myself. I'll be honest with you. In my early career, it's kind of like, man, if they're not going to do it, I'm going to do it then. And then what happens is you work yourself into overload. And then there's that part of me is like, well, okay, they make mistakes. They're making mistakes, but at least they're trying. Well, in the process of them making a lot of mistakes, they're hurting others too. So it's like, okay, how do I have a good balance of where I can trust that individual and put them in a position and say, it's okay to take those risks. But let me help you through the process. And if it's still if it fails to some degree, or you fall on your face, so to speak, it's not the end. And that's where we help them, and we pat them on the back and say, look, this is not the end. In fact, in reality, you just learned something. If I can teach you as a leader to another potential leader and growing leader, that look, failing is not failure, falling is not failure, but it's a learning experience if you take it and apply it, like you were saying earlier. And that's so important. I heard somebody say one time that, if you fall down, pick something up while you're down there. And I think there's a title of a book out right now that talks about, failure as being learning opportunities. And I think that's a mindset.
It is.
It's because here's what I've noticed in developing leaders is, everybody in the church has an idea of some ministry they want to do or want to be involved in. I believe that 100%. What I found early on, where a lot of people would come to me and they would have an idea of a ministry. They'd have, the inspiration, vision, the calling for it, but they lacked the tools to do it, or they lacked the confidence to do it.
Right.
And what they needed was somebody to kind of guide them and push them. So what we did a lot early on was we started the ministry as a partnership where they were beside us.
Very good.
And we kind of modeled that leadership, because what I found is that leadership is really, it's something that's caught, it's modeled.
It sure is.
And so what we would do is we'd get beside them and we'd go out on that ministry. I remember one we did, it was a Metro Kids, where we went out and we ministered to children. So we'd go out every week with them, and we would help them go through their checklist of setting up, of praying with their team, calling their team the night before, making sure everything's in line, and just going through the whole process of them leading that ministry.
Yes.
And then when we felt that they were ready to graduate, so to speak, we would back off. Now that doesn't mean that they wouldn't make mistakes.
Yes.
But we had given them all the tools to where they could succeed.
Amen.
And I think that's what's so important as leadership, is that people need successes. I know in the book, The Leadership Challenge, it talks about little wins equal a big win.
Yeah.
You know, so if you have little increments of winning, and I think that's one of the things in leadership, is we look for this big, huge outcome, when it's the little things that add up to the big thing.
Yes.
And so we would just partner with these people and, really work on modeling that. And that doesn't mean we always got it right. But and sometimes people one thing I found, and you can talk about this as well, is a lot of times we would try to put people in ministries rather than them come to us and say, this is what I would like to do. We tried to place them in ministries that maybe we wanted them to do.
Right.
And put them in a leadership position that maybe we needed them to do sometimes. And they weren't, their heart wasn't in it. They weren't qualified for it. They weren't, it was our vision, not theirs,
yes.
if that makes sense. And ultimately, they would get burnt out, or they would, and some people would flourish in that.
Yes.
Because that's one of the things as a leader, is helping people identify what their calling is. I remember one ministry, a couple came and said, we'd like to do this youth ministry, and the pastor said, I just really feel that you're really called for children right now.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? And they went into children ministry and they flourished there.
Yes.
Because that was helping them identify that. And talk a little bit about that, helping young leaders identify what kind of navigate that course, because
yes.
they know they're called to do something, but a lot of times they don't know how to do it, or they don't know how to take that first step, because they have a fear of failure.
I think it goes back to what you're kind of saying, is the pastor kind of helped steer the boat in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go.
And I think this is where I know that this is where these elevates are going to be great.
Right.
Is because there's a lot of leaders that aren't really sure what to look for in a person.
Yeah.
And that over the next many podcasts that we'll do, we'll be able to share those things and help other ministers and businessmen and people of that nature to understand that just because their people have a skill, that may not be in you. You'll know by watching them, and there'll be certain things, characteristics and things about them, even their abilities and their temperaments.
Yeah.
So many things that are involved to say, you would actually be best here.
Right.
And sometimes you can help guide that, because the people themselves don't even know.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
So that's where a good leader comes in, and he's able to spot sometimes or identify specific things that would make a person flourish, like you said, in a certain area. And then what you do is, when they get there, you do everything possible to make them flourish.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like taking your kid go fishing for the first time. If he doesn't catch nothing, guess what? He's not going again.
Yeah.
It's just a long day of throwing the line in and pulling it out. What we want to do with potential leaders, that you see the potential, you see their great ability, you see a lot of things that you say, wow, that would really fit in this area, that maybe they're not even sure yet, because they're still growing as leaders.
Right.
So they don't see it yet in themselves. Because you don't throw them into something, give them a pole, and say, here's the kind of bait to use, and then they find out, well, we didn't catch nothing at the end of the day. We weren't successful like we were expecting to be. What we're going to do is, I'm going to help you with all the tools that's already deep in there. We're going to pull those out. We're going to pull out those abilities. We're going to pull out your temperament. We're going to everything that God's already blessed you with, those unique qualities, and I'm going to help you flourish in this area. And then from there, You can grow, and you can graduate and go on to the next level or whatever.
Right.
But right now, we want to help you. We want to help you right here in this this area.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Now I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit, and I want you to. I'll give a little preface to this question, and then you take it from there.
Yeah.
You know, we talk a lot about the church world. We talk a lot about raising up leaders in the church world. You know, we know that the Holy Spirit teaches us, He guides us, He develops in us, and we know we all are going for fruit of the Spirit. So how do we take a young man that maybe has some flaws, or a young, share experience about yourself maybe, that maybe there was something you had to learn as a young leader, and they took a chance on you, and you're like, okay, I didn't do that right, but how many of you know we get do-overs a lot of times too, so that's a good thing in leadership. So does one come to mind for you?
You know, when I first started out in ministry, you know, again, that's where the majority of my experiences come from. Like I said, you could be business, you could be in your own family and home. So I share mine from a ministry aspect. When I first started in ministry, my first thought was, I'm going to change the world.
Yes.
Paul Chicotto, watch out, world, watch out, world, here I come.
Yeah.
Well, what I learned very quickly was Paul Chicotto doesn't know enough to change anything. I could barely change my clothes, let alone change the world. And so as a result, what was happening is I was like, how come pastor's not letting me preach up in front of the church?
Right.
How come they're not allowing me to do certain areas of ministry that I'm like, man, I'll go do it.
Right.
The problem is that he saw something in me that was a flaw that he didn't realize that not only might hurt others, but it would mostly hurt me.
Yes.
Because one, there was a lack of humility because I saw something bigger than me. I saw something that only I could do.
Right.
And he believed very much in what I was doing currently in the ministry, and he constantly reassured that. But one thing he kept modeling that I could never get away from is he was so humble.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, so that's how you get from one place to the other, rather than forcing it and pushing it.
That's good.
And as a result, I realized, you know what? I don't need to be the focus and the center. What I really need to be is right where God wants me to be, and He really taught me that. And it helped me do this along that journey along that leadership journey. It kept me from crashing a whole lot more.
Yes. That's good. Well, listen, guys, we're wrapping up our first Elevate podcast. And I just want to let you know that, Pastor Paul, I want you to share how can people contact you? We've talked a little bit about Powerhouse Church. If they want to come hear you preach on a Sunday morning, how can they get here?
We would love to have you. We're located here in Bakersfield. That might be a little far from you if you're out of the country or something, or a long ways from the city than which I'm currently at. But we're in Bakersfield, California. You can find us on our website at www.powerhousechurch.us, not .com. A lot of people mess it up, but it's .us as in United States. Powerhousechurch.us. We would love for you to come and visit us. We would love to hear some comments. And of course, you'll find us on our podcast. You can also find us on Facebook and follow us there, our Powerhouse Church. But we would love to have you give some comments and some feedback. But most of all, it was truly a blessing to be a part of this podcast with you today, Tony.
Great. And we can also, if you want more information about Tony Henley Ministries, you can go to it's just Tony Henley, and that's with a D. It's TonyHendley.org, and on there you can sign up for a free newsletter that comes out every quarter, as well as a blog. And again, we want to welcome you to Elevate. This is our new podcast, and hopefully as we go on, we're going to develop. We're going to just give you more and more tools, and I believe it'll be a blessing to all.